Sarah Langford had always believed that silence was a fragile thing, easy to disturb, impossible to rebuild. And tonight, aboard Flight 482 from Denver to Nashville, silence was the only thing she wanted. She slipped into row 10, seat A, the window seat she'd specifically chosen because it felt tucked away from the world. Far enough from crying bobbies, far enough from the galley, far enough from every reminder of who she used to be. The cabin buzzed with the soft murmur of passengers settling in. The overhead lights dimmed to a sleepy amber glow, and the engines began their low, comforting rumble under the wings. Turbulence was forecasted over Kansas, but she wasn't worried. She knew every bump an aircraft could throw, every personality a sky could have. Too well, in fact. The safety briefing played, and she didn't watch it. She didn't need to. She could recite it from memory. Every line, every gesture, every forced smile from a flight attendant pretending everything was under control even when it was. Sarah leaned her head against the cool window and exhaled slowly, feeling the pressurized air wash over her. For the first time that week, she felt her shoulders loosen. She'd been awake for 27 hours straight, finishing paperwork, sorting through storage bins, and forcing herself to sign the documents she'd been avoiding for 3 years. Documents that ended everything. Documents that made it official. She was no longer a pilot. The thought clawed at her chest, but she pushed it away. The engines roared louder as the plane began its takeoff roll down the Denver runway. She felt her body sink gently into the seatback as the acceleration pressed her deeper into the cushion. She could imagine the exact angle of climb the aircraft would take, the rotation speed, the lift threshold, the precise moment the wheels left the ground. When the plane lifted, she closed her eyes. And for a moment, she almost drifted. Almost. 20 minutes later, the plane leveled off at 34,000 feet. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and an attendant named Maria, her name tag swinging, offered drinks with a practiced smile. Sarah declined politely, tugging her hoodie tighter around her shoulders. She wasn't here for comfort. She wasn't here for anything. She just wanted oblivion for a few hours, maybe the kind that came with sleep, maybe something deeper. She finally let her eyes flutter shut. The sleep came hard and heavy, like someone pulling a thick blanket over her mind. She didn't dream. She hadn't dreamed in months. It felt good, the kind of good that scared her a little because she hadn't felt it in so long. Her breathing slowed. Her fingers unclenched from the fist she hadn't realized she'd made. She didn't know how long she slept, 20 minutes or 2 hours, but the dreamless quiet was shattered by a sudden, jolting tremor under the aircraft. Her eyes shot open. At first she thought it was turbulence, but no, turbulence had rhythm, an unpredictable rhythm, yes, but not like this. What she felt now was sharp, irregular, almost mechanical. Passengers around her looked up, confused but not yet alarmed. A man, too, rose back, paused mid-sip of his ginger ale. A mother pressed her hand on her toddler's chest protectively. A teenager pulled out his earbuds. Then a second tremor rippled through the fuselage. This one stronger. Sarah's heart kicked against her ribs. She knew that vibration. It was the vibration of an aircraft trying to correct something it wasn't supposed to be correcting. The cabin grew eerily still. Then the intercom beeped. Static crackled, and the voice that followed, strained, trembling but trying desperately to hide it, cut straight through her spine. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a pilot on board, please ring your call button immediately. Her breath caught. No, not tonight, not her. She sat perfectly still, trying to make sense of it, but the announcement repeated, this time with more edge, more urgency, more fear cracking through the professional tone. If there is any licensed pilot on board, please press your call button. It is a medical emergency. Passengers gasped. Someone murmured, "Oh my God." The silence that followed was suffocating, like the entire aircraft was holding a single breath. Sarah's throat tightened. She knew what that kind of announcement meant. She'd only heard it once before in her entire flying career, and it was the worst day of her life. The day she lost everything. Her hand hovered over her call button. Her fingers shook. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. She wasn't supposed to fly anymore. She wasn't supposed to touch controls or radios or yokes. She wasn't supposed to step into a cockpit ever again. Her medical was suspended. Her certification was inactive. Her confidence obliterated. And even if she wanted to help, she wasn't sure she could. Flight attendants hurried down the aisle, scanning faces. Their composure had cracks in it, tiny cracks that said they were seconds from panic. The kind of cracks passengers weren't trained to see, but Sarah saw them, too clearly. A man in row 12 pressed his call button. The attendant rushed over, hopeful. "Sir, are you a pilot?" "No," the man stammered. "I just thought maybe someone dropped something. I'm sorry." The attendant's face fell apart for a moment before she forced it back into place. She kept moving. Another tremor shook the cabin. Sarah's pulse spiked. No one else pressed their button. No one. 200 passengers on board. Not one pilot. Except her. The attendant reached row 10. She paused, breath shaky, eyes darting over Sarah's face. "Ma'am," she whispered, did you press your call button?" Sarah swallowed hard. "No, I know I didn't." Are you a pilot? Do you have any experience?" Desperation cracked the attendant's voice now. Sarah inhaled shakily. "I used to be." The attendant froze, eyes widening in a mixture of hope and fear. "Used to be, you mean?" "I haven't flown in 3 years," Sarah said, her voice thin. I'm not active anymore." The attendant didn't blink. "Can you help?" Sarah hesitated. Her body screamed no, but her conscience screamed louder. Before she could answer, a scream erupted from somewhere near the back. A woman stood up, pointing out the window. "Why are we turning like that? Why, oh my God, look!" The aircraft banked sharply, too sharply for a commercial jet. Gasps, panic, commotion. Sarah's decision snapped into place like a switch being thrown. She stood up. "I'll go," she said. The flight attendant didn't even wait for a second confirmation. She grabbed Sarah's arm and hurried her toward the front. Row 10 erupted in whispers. "Is she a pilot? What's happening? Are we going down?" Sarah walked faster. But as she moved, one thought struck her with icy force. Whatever waited for her behind that cockpit door. It wasn't going to be simple. And the next 30 seconds could decide whether this aircraft lived or died. The cabin erupted into a tense, chaotic symphony. Passengers whispered in panicked tones, some clutching the armrests so tightly that their knuckles turned white. Flight attendants moved with practiced urgency, their calm masks slipping at the edges. The intercom crackled again, cutting through the tense murmurs. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice was strained, nearly cracking under the pressure. "We are experiencing an emergency. I need someone with piloting experience to come forward immediately." The words seemed to freeze the air. Row 10, where she sat curled in her economy seat, felt miles away from the commotion. She had been drifting in and out of sleep, the hum of the engines lulling her into a rare calm. Now that tranquility shattered. Her pulse spiked, adrenaline coursing through her veins, and for a moment she could barely breathe. All around her, passengers scanned each other, searching for someone to step forward. No one moved. Eyes darted toward the cockpit door, then back at the aisle, as if willing the right person to appear by sheer will. The flight attendants exchanged tense glances, their fingers tightening around clipboards and headsets. She rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the fog of sleep. "Pilot," she muttered under her breath. It sounded absurd even to her own ears. She was just a passenger. The thought of flying this massive jet seemed like something out of a nightmare or a movie. And yet, there was something in her gut, a faint whisper of certainty she couldn't ignore. The intercom clicked again. Time is critical. We are losing altitude and I cannot regain control. Anyone trained, please now. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. Panic began spreading like wildfire. A child in the row ahead started to cry, and his mother's soft, frightened whispers barely calmed him. Flight attendants guided passengers into temporary calm, but the fear lingered like a heavy cloud. Her thoughts raced. She had been a flight instructor years ago before life pulled her in a different direction. Marriage, kids, a corporate job she had hated. But the skills were still there, buried deep under layers of routine and years of not flying. Her hands trembled as she realized what this meant. Someone had to go up there. Someone had to save these people. She glanced down the aisle. Faces full of fear stared back at her. The captain's words echoed again in her mind. Is there a pilot on board? Her throat tightened and she swallowed hard. Could she really do this? She hadn't flown a commercial airliner before, only small training aircraft. But she knew enough about flight dynamics, enough about emergency procedures. Maybe it was enough. The flight attendants were now signaling, scanning the aisles frantically. A tall man in a business suit rose to his feet, shaking his head. I can't, he said, voice wavering. I don't know how. Another passenger, a young woman with a laptop bag, spoke up. I have a license, but it's just a private plane. She sank back into her seat, face pale, hands gripping her knees. The murmurs of hope and despair collided in a confusing, desperate cacophony. Her heart hammered in her chest. The little girl next to her clutched her mother's hand, eyes wide, unblinking. Fear radiated from every passenger, silent but palpable. And then, she heard the soft, almost inaudible sound of a plane dropping in altitude. The cabin lurched slightly, and a collective gasp filled the air. She stood up, and for a moment time seemed suspended. All eyes turned toward her. Every passenger, every attendant, the captain himself through the intercom. Suddenly, it was as if she alone existed in the world. Her breath came in shallow, rapid bursts, but beneath the panic a strange calm settled. This was it. She had trained for emergencies, had faced difficult situations before. This was just another one, only bigger, only higher stakes. A flight attendant stepped toward her, eyes wide. You can fly this." Her voice trembled. "I can try," she said, voice firmer than she felt, "but I need instructions." The intercom crackled again. "Anyone on board with experience, please come to the cockpit now. We are losing control rapidly." Every step toward the cockpit felt surreal, as if she were walking in slow motion. The carpet beneath her feet seemed unreal, the murmurs of the passengers distant, almost dreamlike. Her mind raced through every emergency protocol she remembered, the checklists, the engine procedures, the communications with air traffic control. Every second felt like an hour, but she knew hesitation would be fatal. The cockpit door loomed ahead, closed and heavy. She knocked gently, voice steady despite the storm inside. "Captain, I can help. I have experience." There was a pause. Then the door slid open slightly, revealing the captain, sweat streaking his face, eyes wide with both fear and hope. He studied her for a moment as if weighing the risk, then nodded. "Get in, quickly." Inside the cockpit was a flurry of flashing lights, warning alarms and trembling hands. The co-pilot slumped against the side, clearly overwhelmed, while the captain wrestled with the controls. The plane shuddered as it dropped through layers of clouds, turbulence tossing it like a toy. She buckled in, her hands hovering over the controls. Every instrument screamed crisis, altitude dropping, engines sputtering, the autopilot offline. Her mind went blank for a split second, then snapped back into focus. She knew the basics. Stabilize first, communicate, manage the throttle, check the instruments. "Okay," she said, voice firm. "Tell me what's happening." The captain exhaled shakily. "Autopilot failed. We lost one engine and we're descending faster than we should. Air traffic control is trying to guide us, but we need to regain manual control, or," his voice trailed off, "or the plane would crash." She didn't need him to finish the sentence. She didn't need to see the instruments to know the stakes. Every life in that cabin rested on her next moves. "All right," she said, gripping the yoke. "Guide me step by step." The captain nodded, voice shaking. "Throttle here, adjust this. No, slightly less. Yes, yes, steady, steady." Outside, the sky churned with storm clouds, lightning flashing like warning signals. Rain streaked the windshield, wind buffeting the fuselage, and somewhere deep in the cabin, the engine's roar became almost a growl. Minutes felt like hours. Every passenger gripped their seats, whispered prayers, some silent, some aloud. Fear was a living entity inside the cabin, twisting and turning with every shudder, every alarm. And then a sudden jolt. The plane dipped sharply, a scream of metal under pressure filling the cockpit. Her hands tightened, muscles taut, heart hammering. "Hold on," the captain shouted. She did. For a moment the world narrowed to her hands, the yoke, and the desperate rhythm of her own pulse. Then a voice came from the intercom, almost drowned out by the storm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We have someone taking control." And just like that, the uncertainty of their fate hung in the air like thick smoke. Every passenger held their breath, every child clung to a parent, every eye fixed on the cockpit doors. Somewhere deep inside, she knew, this was only the beginning. The storm outside raged on, but inside her, a fire had ignited, one that could either save them all or plunge the plane, and everyone on it, into the abyss. And then, as she steadied the controls, a sudden, terrifying realization hit her. She had no idea if this plane could even be landed safely. The cabin remained tense, the storm outside painting streaks of gray and white against the windows. Rain lashed the fuselage, and the roar of wind sounded almost like a beast circling the plane. Passengers gripped their seats as if sheer will could hold the plane aloft. Every second stretched impossibly long, each jolt a reminder that lives hung in the balance. In the cockpit, she fought to steady her shaking hands. The yoke felt alien beneath her fingers, yet familiar in a way that surprised her. She had trained in small aircraft, but this commercial airliner was a different beast entirely. Hundreds of tons of metal, carrying over 100 souls. She adjusted the throttle, eyes darting between flashing indicators, warning lights, and the storm-battered horizon. The captain, drenched in sweat, guided her with terse, clipped commands. "Altimeter stable, check. Flaps, adjust. Heading, okay, you're doing it." "You're sure?" she asked, heart pounding. "You're the only one who can do this. Focus." His voice, normally calm and commanding, trembled with raw fear. They had only minutes to stabilize the plane before reaching a treacherous stretch of storm cells ahead. Lightning illuminated the cockpit in blinding flashes, momentarily revealing the strained faces of everyone aboard. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe evenly, each breath a lifeline against the panic clawing at her chest. A loud chime pierced the cockpit. Warning lights blinked red. Engine 2 was overheating. The plane shuddered violently. "Engine 2, we need to feather it," the captain shouted, pointing at the controls. She nodded, recalling the procedure she had drilled countless times in her private training, though never at this scale. "Throttle 2 pulling back, check, okay." A sudden jolt threw her against the yoke. The co-pilot, pale and trembling, tried to assist but only managed to press the wrong button. The plane dipped sharply, banking to the left. A scream rose from the cabin, echoing up through the cockpit floor. "Stabilize," she yelled, voice cracking. She gritted her teeth, muscles taut, and fought against the descent. Slowly, agonizingly, the plane leveled out. Sweat stung her eyes as she scanned the instruments again. Altitude was critical, barely above the minimum safe level. Below them, flashes of lightning revealed glimpses of the mountainous terrain they were skimming over. She swallowed hard. A single miscalculation would be fatal. The thought of every passenger's face, the children, the elderly, the families, pressed down on her like a weight. "Communicate with ATC," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The captain handed her the radio microphone. "Flight 412, requesting immediate vector and emergency landing. We are losing altitude, one engine offline, manual control engaged. His hands gripped the edge of the console, knuckles white, eyes never leaving her. Static filled the cockpit. Then a calm, authoritative voice broke through. Flight 412, you are cleared for emergency landing at County Regional. Descend to 5,000 feet and maintain heading 270. Weather is severe. Be advised, visibility is poor. She exhaled sharply. It wasn't perfect, but it was a lifeline. The runway was miles away, and the storm still raged between them and safety. Every second mattered. Every calculation, every maneuver would decide if they lived or died. The plane dipped again. Rain battered the windshield in sheets, wind rocking the fuselage, each flash of lightning blinding. She could see glimpses of terrified passengers through the cockpit window reflection, their faces pressed against the glass, eyes wide, fear etched in every line. Mothers whispered prayers, children clung to their blankets, elderly men gripped hands of strangers as if solidarity could shield them from fate. "Flaps deploy now," the captain barked. She obeyed, carefully extending the flaps to increase lift while maintaining heading. The plane groaned, metal straining under the pressure. Warning alarms screamed in protest. She adjusted the throttle, eyes darting between instruments, focusing on rhythm, procedure, control. One misstep and the plane would flip, crash, and burn. Time slowed. Each breath, each movement became a single unit of existence. She could hear the co-pilot's shallow breaths, the captain's muttered calculations, the alarms, the wind, the rain. She was acutely aware of her own heartbeat, hammering like a drum in a war march. "Altitude dropping fast, drop gear," the captain shouted. Her hands shook as she extended the landing gear. The plane shuddered violently. The cabin below groaned, passengers' screams rising in panic. Then, almost miraculously, the plane stabilized. She adjusted her trajectory slightly, aligning with the runway coordinates ATC had given them. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the storm-tossed sky. Rain hammered down with relentless fury. She felt a surge of vertigo, dizziness threatening to overwhelm her, but she forced focus. She thought of the families, of the children, of the elderly passengers who had entrusted their lives to fate, to her. "Almost there, almost," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The captain placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You've got this, keep her steady." Sweat dripped down her forehead, blurring her vision. She wiped it away, refocusing on the instruments. The runway was a sliver of light through the storm, barely visible, but there it was, salvation in the chaos. The plane dipped dangerously low, caught in a sudden gust. She felt the full weight of gravity tugging at them, the engine straining against the storm's fury. She fought to maintain altitude, adjusting controls minutely, muscles trembling with effort. Passengers in the cabin gasped as the plane shuddered violently. A woman screamed, gripping her child. A man whispered prayers under his breath, eyes wide. The hum of the engines was deafening, a roar of raw mechanical life against the storm. Seconds felt like lifetimes. The runway, though distant, grew closer, a faint line of light against the tempest. Her hands ached, her muscles burned, but she couldn't stop. She refused to stop. Failure was not an option. And then a sudden jolt. The plane veered slightly off course, rolling dangerously. Her stomach lurched, nausea threatening. Lightning struck near the left wing, a blinding explosion of white light, and the plane groaned, metal whining under the strain. The co-pilot's voice broke, trembling. "We're not going to make it, She silenced him with a look, focus, control, rhythm. She regained the plane's alignment, adjusting flaps and throttle with precision, heart hammering, muscles screaming. The storm began to relent slightly, as if testing their resolve before the final challenge. The runway grew closer, yet every movement felt fraught with peril. The plane was alive, breathing, struggling, just like her. She glanced at the captain. He nodded, trust and fear interwoven in his gaze. Together, they fought the machine, the storm, and their own exhaustion. And then, as the wheels touched down with a violent jolt, the cabin lurched and passengers screamed, holding on as the plane skidded down the rain-soaked tarmac. But the ordeal was far from over. A tire screeched, sparks flew. The plane veered slightly off the center line. Hearts skipped, screams rose. Every passenger braced for impact. She tightened her grip. One final correction, one final push. The plane steadied, slowly, miraculously. They were alive. And yet, as the plane rolled to a halt, rain still lashing, engines screaming in protest, she realized one terrifying truth. The storm wasn't over, and neither was the fight. A warning light blinked. The left engine was critically damaged. Fuel indicators dropped sharply, and somewhere in the shadows of the storm, the next danger was waiting. The passenger's relief was palpable, yet fragile. Every face was etched with disbelief, gratitude, and lingering fear. She allowed herself a brief glance at the cabin, at the people she had just saved. And then the intercom crackled, the captain's voice tense. "Ladies and gentlemen, we may have landed, but the danger isn't over. Brace yourselves. We're not out of this yet." Plane had touched down, but the storm's fury hadn't completely abated. Rain still pelted the fuselage, turning the tarmac into a slick, reflective hazard. Every flash of lightning cast distorted shadows across the cabin windows, illuminating faces etched with raw fear. She unbuckled her harness slowly, muscles stiff and trembling, and rose, scanning the cabin. Passengers remained in shocked silence, gripping their armrests or each other, hesitant to move. Children clung to parents, eyes wide, still processing the near-death experience. Some were trembling, others muttering prayers, and a few sat frozen, unable to comprehend the reality. They were alive. For a moment, a fragile relief washed over the cabin. But the intercom crackled, shattering the temporary calm. "Attention all crew and passengers." The captain's voice was sharp, laced with tension. "We have a structural issue. Engine 1 sustained critical damage during landing. Evacuation is necessary. Remain calm, follow instructions." The words hit like ice water. Evacuation, critical damage. The storm wasn't just an obstacle. They were trapped in a machine that might not survive long enough to get everyone safely off. Panic flickered across faces. Her heart sank. The danger had shifted from the sky to the plane itself. She moved through the aisle with deliberate calm, keeping her voice steady. "Stay calm. Follow the instructions. We'll get everyone out safely," she said, forcing a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Some passengers looked at her, desperation mingling with trust. For now, she was their anchor. Flight attendants moved quickly, directing passengers toward emergency exits, checking that seatbelts were fastened correctly and that no one was obstructing the aisles. But the tension was palpable. Every step carried the threat of catastrophe. The damaged engine's alarm bell continued to shriek intermittently, a constant reminder of their fragile situation. She reached the cockpit again, where the captain and co-pilot were assessing the damage. The cockpit smelled of burnt metal and oil, a harsh tang that burned her nostrils. Warning lights blinked relentlessly, and the plane's systems flickered unpredictably. "Left engine unstable," the captain said grimly. "If we move too quickly, the fuselage might fail. We need to coordinate the evacuation carefully." She nodded, her mind racing. The passengers' lives depended on their ability to execute a near-perfect procedure. She had stabilized the plane once, but now the challenge had shifted entirely. One misstep could lead to disaster. The storm outside began to wane slightly, though the tarmac remained slick and dangerous. Ground crews were attempting to reach the aircraft, but visibility was poor. Every second counted. She returned to the aisle, directing passengers with calm authority. "Move quickly but carefully. Don't push. Keep your distance from the wings. Follow the lights." The first wave of passengers began to move, and the tension inside the cabin was electric. She noticed a woman in the back struggling with her suitcase. The woman's eyes were panicked, voice trembling. "I can't leave it," she said. "No, leave it," she shouted. "Your life is more important." The woman froze, then reluctantly dropped the bag. The subtle act of survival over material attachment struck her deeply, human instinct, raw and unfiltered in the face of mortality. As the passengers moved toward the exits, a sudden loud bang echoed from the left engine. Sparks flew, and the metal groaned, bending alarmingly. A wave of fear rippled through the cabin. Children cried, parents shouted, and some passengers fell to their knees, gripping seats as if trying to anchor themselves against an inevitable catastrophe. She ran toward the nearest emergency exit, motioning for people to stay calm and orderly. "One step at a time. You can do this." Her own voice cracked slightly but carried the force of authority. The passengers hesitated for only a fraction of a second before following her lead. Outside, the rain-soaked tarmac reflected the flashing red and white lights of emergency vehicles approaching. But the danger was still immediate. The damaged engine hissed and spat sparks, threatening to ignite. Time had become their enemy. She directed passengers down the inflatable slide, watching as each one descended safely. Relief and fear were tangled in every expression. She caught the eye of a little boy, no more than 7, who clutched a stuffed bear so tightly it was nearly crushed. Their eyes met and she gave a reassuring nod. The boy nodded back, courage shining through his fear. "Next group," she shouted, her voice steadying with resolve. Adrenaline and focus had replaced panic, driving her every move. But just as they were midway through evacuation, a sudden gust of wind struck the plane's fuselage violently. The left engine flared, flames licking outward. The cabin shuddered. The remaining passengers froze, horror evident on every face. The captain shouted through the intercom, his voice tense but controlled. "Move, now, go, go, go." She turned to the last row, guiding passengers down the slides. One man stumbled, slipping in the wet metal. She grabbed his arm, pulling him to safety. Another child began to cry, separated from his parents momentarily. She scooped him up, running toward the exit. The plane groaned again, the left engine flaring dangerously close to the fuselage. Sparks rained down the side of the aircraft. Each second stretched into an eternity, and the reality of what could happen was impossible to ignore. If they didn't move fast, the plane could explode at any moment. She reached the final passengers and directed them with unwavering authority. "You're almost there. Keep moving, trust me." One elderly woman hesitated, trembling, paralyzed by fear. She reached out, grabbed the woman's hand and pulled her forward. The woman's eyes filled with tears, gratitude mingling with terror. Finally, the last passengers slid down the emergency slides, landing safely on the wet tarmac. They were soaked, shaken, and exhausted, but alive. Emergency crews rushed toward them, stretching blankets over shivering shoulders, guiding them away from the danger. She took a step back and looked at the plane. Flames licked the side of the left engine. The fuselage groaned under stress. Every second now could be catastrophic. Yet she felt a surge of triumph mixed with exhaustion. They had made it out. The worst had been avoided for now. But as she caught her breath, a harsh, chilling sound echoed from the plane, the metal twisting violently, a deep, ominous groan. The fire flared higher. Everyone froze, watching in stunned silence. Then the captain emerged from the cockpit, his face pale but eyes sharp. He gestured for her to move back. "It's not over. The storm may have weakened, but the plane is unstable. We need to clear the area immediately." She nodded, heart hammering. They were alive, yes, but the danger still lingered, silent and waiting. One wrong move, one spark too close, and the miracle they had just survived could vanish in an instant. As emergency crews guided the passengers to a safe distance, she felt her knees weaken. Every muscle was trembling, every nerve raw from the adrenaline. She looked back at the plane, now a dark silhouette against the storm-slicked tarmac, smoke curling from the damaged engine. And in that moment, A terrifying thought struck her. They had survived the landing and the storm, but the real danger was only beginning. From the shadows of the storm, an ominous hiss emerged. The plane itself was groaning in protest. The fire from the engine flared again, higher this time. Emergency crews shouted warnings, but the chaos of wind and rain made it nearly impossible to hear. She turned toward the gathered passengers, all huddled together under blankets, eyes wide, hearts racing. They had trusted her, relied on her, and now, even though they were safe for the moment, their safety remained fragile. Somewhere deep inside, she understood. This night wasn't over, and neither was the fight for survival. The storm had finally begun to ebb, leaving a rain-slicked, gleaming tarmac that reflected the flashing lights of emergency vehicles. Passengers huddled under blankets, shivering from both cold and adrenaline, eyes wide with disbelief. They had survived landing a damaged aircraft in a storm, a feat most would never even imagine, but the tension in the air remained palpable. Survival had been achieved, but the danger wasn't gone. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her shaking hands and pounding heart. She had guided the plane down, overseen the evacuation, and kept dozens of terrified passengers alive. Yet she felt no relief, only the heavy weight of responsibility pressing down like the storm clouds that still hung overhead. The captain approached her, eyes scanning the plane warily. "We need to inspect the aircraft carefully. Engine 1 is critically damaged. There's a chance it could rupture or explode if left unattended." His voice was calm but edged with urgency, the kind of tension that cut through the fog of exhaustion. She nodded. "Do we have clearance from ground control?" "Not yet," he said grimly. "The tarmac is unstable. Debris from the storm makes moving near the aircraft dangerous. We can't risk another accident." She swallowed hard. Even now, the plane posed a lethal threat. The thought that the metal leviathan they had just escaped could suddenly claim lives at any moment sent a chill down her spine. Yet she couldn't let fear paralyze her. There were passengers to keep safe and the aircraft to secure. Ground crews began moving cautiously around the plane, flashlights piercing the lingering rain and mist. They assessed the wing for damage, keeping a safe distance from the damaged engine. Sparks still flickered from the left engine, smoke curling into the stormy night air. She walked among the passengers, offering reassurances, calming trembling hands and softening panicked expressions. A small boy tugged at her sleeve, his face streaked with tears. "Are we really safe?" he asked, voice quivering. She knelt to meet his gaze, forcing a smile through her own exhaustion. "For now, yes, but we must stay careful. The plane is still dangerous. That's why we're all here together, staying safe." The boy nodded, clutching his stuffed bear closer. Around her, other passengers began whispering to each other, sharing silent gratitude and fear. Mothers held children tight, elderly men supported each other, and strangers offered words of comfort. Survival had forged an unspoken bond among them, raw and immediate. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the damaged left engine. Sparks flew higher this time, accompanied by a hiss and a growing plume of smoke. Some passengers screamed, clutching blankets and each other. Panic threatened to erupt again. She stepped forward, trying to calm them. "Stay back, move further away from the plane." Her voice carried authority, but the danger was real. Metal was twisting under stress. The engine was unstable, and every spark was a potential ignition. The captain gestured urgently. "We need to disconnect the plane from the jetway and tow it to a safer location before the engine gives out completely." Her stomach dropped. The idea of moving a plane with a compromised engine in a storm-drenched tarmac sounded suicidal, but hesitation wasn't an option. Lives depended on swift, precise action. Ground crews scrambled, coordinating with the cockpit. Cables were secured, vehicles positioned. The plane groaned under the effort as it was gently nudged forward. Sparks continued to shoot from the engine, and the air smelled sharply of burnt metal and oil. Every second was a gamble. A sudden, sharp jolt rocked the aircraft. A hydraulic line had ruptured under the stress, and the plane shuddered violently. Alarms blared in the cockpit, a cacophony that made her ears ring. The captain shouted instructions, voice tight with controlled panic, but the tension was palpable. She moved alongside the ground crew, ensuring passengers remained at a safe distance. Keep moving," she shouted. Rainwater and oil made the ground slippery. One of the ground crew slipped, catching himself just in time, and the emergency vehicle swerved slightly, lights spinning across the wet surface. The plane inched forward, groaning with every motion. Sparks flew from the left engine like a miniature firework display, and smoke curled into the night sky. She could feel the heat radiating even from a distance. The potential for catastrophe was immense, yet the coordination of crews, passengers, and herself kept the situation from tipping into chaos. As the aircraft approached a safer area, another sudden sound jolted everyone, a loud hissing, followed by the unmistakable snap of metal. Engine 1 had begun to fail structurally, twisting under pressure. The plane shuddered violently, and the air around them vibrated with tension. The captain's voice came over the intercom, urgent and commanding. "All personnel, stay clear. This could get dangerous." She ran toward the passengers, urging them farther back, feeling every heartbeat pound in her chest. The little boy she had comforted earlier clutched her arm. "I'm scared," he whispered. "I know," she replied, gripping his small hand. "But you're safe. We're getting through this together, trust me." Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the plane in stark relief. The left engine flared again, sparks shooting higher, smoke curling aggressively. Ground crews moved swiftly, detaching the cables and securing the plane for a tow. Her eyes darted from crew to cockpit, monitoring every movement, ready to respond if disaster struck. And then another jolt. The aircraft lurched slightly, twisting toward the rain-slicked tarmac. Panic flickered in the passenger's eyes, but she kept her voice steady. Stay calm, step back, follow my lead." A member of the ground crew shouted instructions, guiding the tow vehicle carefully, while another sprayed foam around the damaged engine as a precaution against fire. Sparks continued to fly, and the plane's metal groaned audibly, a living creature under immense stress. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the aircraft reached a safer distance, far from the tarmac and passengers. Relief rippled through the crowd, though everyone remained tense. The plane was stable for now, but the damage was critical and the danger wasn't gone. The captain stepped out, drenched, face pale but eyes sharp. He met her gaze. "You've kept everyone alive tonight. I don't know how to thank you enough." She shook her head, exhausted, body trembling. "We did it together. The crews, the passengers, everyone played a part. But this isn't over. We need to make sure it's fully secured before anyone relaxes." A hush fell over the group. Relief had arrived, but fear lingered, a ghost that would not easily leave. The passengers huddled together, silent and exhausted, watching the damaged plane in disbelief. Children clung to parents, some muttering prayers, others simply staring at the mechanical giant they had survived. And then a sudden, ominous hiss cut through the air. Smoke curled from the engine once more, sharper this time, accompanied by a low, metallic groan. The storm had passed, but the threat remained, silent, patient, and lethal. Her stomach dropped as she realized the truth. They had survived landing, evacuation, and immediate danger, but the plane itself was a ticking bomb, and one wrong move could ignite it in an instant. The passengers' relief was fragile, hanging by a thread. The ground crews exchanged worried glances, aware of how precarious the situation had become. She felt the weight of responsibility press down on her again. Every life depended on their next steps. She turned toward the captain, voice tight with determination. "We need to act fast. Every second counts." He nodded grimly. "Agreed. Let's secure it before this thing decides to end it all." And in that moment she realized. Survival wasn't just about skill or luck. It was about courage, leadership, and the relentless refusal to give up, even when every instinct screamed to run. The night was far from over, and she knew, deep in her bones, that the next challenge would test them all in ways they could never have imagined. The damaged plane sat ominously on the tarmac, smoke curling from the left engine, sparks still flickering against the night sky. The storm had receded, but the danger had not. Every muscle in her body ached, adrenaline still coursing, mind racing through every possible contingency. The passengers huddled together, blankets wrapped tightly around shivering shoulders, their faces etched with disbelief, fear, and fragile relief. Emergency crews worked with tense efficiency, moving cautiously around the aircraft. Hoses, foam, and safety cables surrounded the twisted metal, a fragile barrier against the catastrophic potential hidden inside the damaged engine. Every second was critical. One misstep, one miscalculation, could trigger a chain reaction no one could survive. She moved toward the cockpit, ignoring the ache in her legs, the fatigue weighing her down like a leaden coat. The captain and co-pilot were assessing the controls, muttering technical terms she half understood. The plane's instruments blinked relentlessly, warning of critical pressure in the hydraulic systems. "Left engine is unstable," the captain said grimly. "We need to shut it down manually, but it's risky, the hydraulics are failing." Her stomach tightened. Manually shutting down the engine could stabilize the plane, or it could trigger a catastrophic failure. There was no margin for error. The knowledge of the lives at stake pressed down on her like the weight of the storm itself. "Give me the checklist," she said, voice firm, masking the fear clawing at her chest. The captain handed her a laminated sheet, edges soaked from rain, trembling slightly in his grip. She scanned it, memorizing the sequence of levers, switches, and buttons. Every action had to be precise. One slip, one delayed move, and the plane could explode in an instant. Outside, the passengers watched, tense and silent. Some clutched children, some whispered prayers, and some simply stared, frozen by the surreal tension of the moment. Every eye was on her, every life hanging in balance. She slid into the cockpit, her hands steadying on the controls. Sparks flickered from the damaged engine, heat radiating against the fuselage. The smell of burnt oil and metal filled the cockpit. Her chest tightened, breath coming fast, but she forced herself to focus. "Hydraulic pressure is dropping," the co-pilot said, voice tight with tension. "If we wait too long, we lose the ability to control the flaps and throttle." She swallowed hard, hands hovering over the switches. "Step by step," she whispered to herself, repeating the checklist silently. "Focus, precision, survival." The first lever moved smoothly. A hiss of escaping air cut through the cockpit as the system disengaged. Sparks flared from the engine again. She pressed the second switch, holding her breath. Alarms screamed, warning of critical pressure loss. Her pulse hammered in her ears. The captain's voice broke through. "Almost there, keep going." She adjusted the throttle manually, countering the residual thrust from the damaged engine. The plane shuddered violently, a reminder that they were dancing on the edge of disaster. Sparks shot higher, smoke thickened, and the faint smell of burning metal grew stronger. "Last step," she murmured, voice barely audible. She pulled the final lever, heart in her throat. For a moment nothing happened. Then a hiss followed by silence. The left engine shuddered, groaned, and finally went quiet. Smoke still lingered, but the danger had diminished. The plane, though battered, had stabilized. A tense silence filled the cockpit. She exhaled slowly, relief mixing with lingering fear. The captain clapped a hand on her shoulder. "You did it. That was incredible." She shook her head, muscles trembling. "It's not over until everyone is safe." Outside, the passengers erupted in muted cheers, some sobbing, some laughing, some simply shaking in disbelief. The worst had been avoided, yet the memory of the terror clung to them like a shadow. Children clung to parents, elderly men clasped hands, and strangers shared quiet nods of gratitude. They had survived, but the intensity of the night had etched itself into every face. Emergency crews guided passengers toward safe shelters, away from the damaged plane. She followed, ensuring that every movement was calm and orderly. Some passengers hugged her, whispering thanks. Others simply stared, unable to articulate the depth of their relief. And then an unexpected sound. A low, mechanical groan from the plane. She froze. Sparks flared briefly from the left engine again, smoke curling upward. The hydraulic system had stabilized, but the aircraft's frame was stressed. A sudden gust of wind rattled the fuselage. The captain approached, his face tight with concern. "The storm may be gone, but the damage is severe. We need to wait for structural engineers before we can be sure the plane is safe." She nodded, tension still gripping her chest. "We'll keep everyone back. No one gets near it until it's fully secured." The passengers were moved further away, emergency crews forming a perimeter. The night was quiet now, the storm having passed, but the threat remained, a reminder that survival was fragile and temporary. She found a quiet corner, knees collapsing under her. Every muscle ached, adrenaline fatting, replaced by exhaustion so deep it threatened to pull her into unconsciousness. She allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, to feel the reality of what they had survived. But the night was not yet over. Somewhere in the shadows of the rain-soaked tarmac, the plane still loomed, a reminder of the razor-thin line between life and death. She thought of the passengers, the children, the elderly, the families who had entrusted their lives to her courage and skill. She thought of the captain and crew whose trust had been placed in her hands. And she realized, despite the exhaustion and fear, that survival demanded vigilance until the very end. A sudden shout drew her attention. One of the ground crew had spotted something, a faint smoke trail from the left wingtip, small but unmistakable. Sparks danced dangerously close to fuel lines. Her heart leapt into her throat. The plane was still alive, still threatening. Even after everything, the final challenge remained, one last test of nerve, focus, and courage. The captain's voice came over, calm but firm. "We're not leaving until this aircraft is completely safe. Stay alert." She nodded, rising to her feet, hands still trembling but resolute. Every life depended on the next move, every decision was critical. The passengers, exhausted and frightened, looked to her again. They trusted her. They believed in her. And she could not fail them, not now, not ever. She stepped toward the plane, flashlight in hand, knowing that the final confrontation with the damaged aircraft was about to begin. One wrong move, one spark too close, one miscalculation, and the fragile miracle of survival could vanish in an instant. The night was silent except for the faint hiss of the damaged engine and the distant echo of emergency crews working tirelessly. Rain had stopped, but the air was heavy with anticipation. She took a deep breath, every nerve alert, every muscle tense, ready to face the ultimate test. And in that instant, she understood the truth of the night. Survival was never guaranteed, and courage was the only weapon that could save them all. The plane loomed in the dim light of the tarmac, massive and dangerous, its twisted metal and flickering lights a stark reminder of the chaos they had survived, and the peril that still lingered. The storm had finally passed, but the tension clung to the night like a living thing. Sparks flickered intermittently from the damaged left engine, smoke curling upward in thin gray streams. Every heartbeat felt amplified, as if the plane itself were alive and waiting for a single misstep. She moved toward the aircraft, flashlight in hand, muscles tense, pulse hammering. Every step was deliberate, calculated. The ground crew followed, equally cautious, their eyes scanning the damaged fuselage for anything that could trigger catastrophe. The passengers, huddled safely behind the perimeter, watched silently, their fear mingling with awe at her unwavering resolve. "Left wing tip still sparking," one crew member shouted, voice tense. "Fuel line looks compromised. We need to stabilize it immediately." She nodded, gripping the flashlight tighter, illuminating the twisted metal. The plane had survived landing, the storm, and the evacuation, but now the real test was controlling the remnants of its fury. Every movement could provoke disaster. The captain approached, pointing toward the engine. "We have foam and extinguishers ready. You'll need to guide the crew step by step. Precision is critical." Her throat tightened. She had already risked her life once, taken command in a cockpit while hundreds of souls relied on her skill. But now, at ground level, the danger was different. It was silent, insidious. One wrong action could ignite the fuel, and no one would survive. "Let's do this," she said, forcing a steady tone. Her voice was firm, commanding, the anchor in the storm of fear surrounding them. The ground crew moved cautiously, attaching foam sprayers near the left engine while keeping a safe distance. She guided each step, her flashlight illuminating the exact points of concern. Sparks danced dangerously close to frayed wiring and fuel lines. Every breath felt heavy, each second stretching impossibly long. A sudden flare from the left engine made her jump back instinctively, heart racing. Sparks shot higher, smoke curling aggressively. One misstep and it could ignite. "Steady, slow, careful," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The crew froze, watching her for guidance. She motioned, pointing precisely where they should place hoses and sprays. Minutes passed like hours. The plane groaned under stress, metal protesting, every sound amplified in the tense silence. She moved closer, flashlight illuminating the twisted fuselage, nodding each weak point, each spark that could become disaster. Sweat streamed down her face, but she did not falter. Every passenger alive depended on her composure now. Then a loud bang shook the tarmac. A part of the engine casing twisted unexpectedly, throwing sparks across the surrounding area. She ducked instinctively, heart leaping, but the crew followed her lead, moving with precision despite the danger. "Almost there," she shouted, urgency cutting through exhaustion. "Foam on the left wingtip, move it closer, slow." They obeyed, inching toward the source of the sparks, every movement measured, deliberate. The tension was unbearable yet controlled. Every passenger's eyes remained fixed on the scene, horror and fascination mingling in their expressions. Children clutched parents, mothers whispered prayers, elderly men gritted their teeth. They had survived once. Could they survive twice? The plane groaned again, metal twisting with a low, ominous creak. Sparks continued to flare from the left engine. The smell of burnt metal and oil filled the air. She gritted her teeth, hands trembling slightly, but focus kept her grounded. "Check the flammable sections," she shouted to a crew member. "Move the hoses closer, careful with that line." The crew moved like dancers in a deadly ballet, guided by her precise commands. Foam hissed as it sprayed across the engine, smothering sparks, forming a barrier between potential ignition and disaster. Sweat stung her eyes, dripping down her temple, but she blinked it away, never breaking focus. A sudden screech of metal tore through the night. The fuselage had shifted slightly under stress. Sparks erupted again, higher this time. She froze, every muscle tensing, heart hammering. For a split second, the weight of all the lives depending on her threatened to crush her resolve. Then she breathed deeply, refocusing. "Steady, step back slightly, control your movement, we are not losing anyone tonight." Her voice carried authority, a lifeline through the tension. The crew obeyed, repositioning hoses, holding the foam steady. Sparks sizzled but did not ignite. The plane groaned, twisting slightly, but the emergency measures held. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last spark was smothered. Foam covered the left engine, smoke still rising but no flames. The danger, while not entirely gone, had been controlled. The plane was stabilized. A collective exhale swept through the perimeter. Passengers clutched each other, some crying, some laughing in disbelief. Children hugged parents, elderly men shook hands silently, and strangers exchanged wordless nods of gratitude. They had survived yet again, against odds that seemed impossible. She stepped back, body trembling from exhaustion, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The captain approached, his face pale but eyes sharp. He placed a firm hand on her shoulder. You saved them all," he said, voice filled with awe. "From landing to evacuation to this, I don't know how you did it." She shook her head, barely able to speak. We did it together. Everyone contributed. But it's not over until the engineers confirm the plane is completely safe. Emergency crews began inspecting the aircraft thoroughly, confirming structural integrity and stability. Sparks were gone, smoke reduced to thin curls, and the plane stood silently on the tarmac. Yet the memory of the chaos, the terror, and the near death hung heavily in the air. Passengers were guided to safe shelters, blankets draped over shoulders, voices hushed as the reality of the night settled in. She moved among them, offering reassurance, comforting children, calming parents, and sharing quiet moments of humanity. Some passengers approached her directly, eyes wide, faces streaked with tears. "Thank you," one whispered, voice trembling. "You saved us all." Another held her hands, words failing as emotion overtook them. She nodded, swallowing back her own tears, letting the gratitude and relief wash over her briefly. It was a small respite in a night filled with terror. But even as the adrenaline ebbed, she knew the night's lessons would linger forever. Fear, courage, and the fragile line between life and death had intertwined in ways she would never forget. Every decision, every act of calm authority had mattered. Every life had depended on focus, precision, and the refusal to give in to panic. The plane, though stabilized, still stood as a reminder of the night's peril, a colossal metal beast that had nearly claimed them all. She looked back at it, heart heavy, pulse still racing, and understood the magnitude of what they had survived. And then from the perimeter of emergency crews and passengers, a faint murmur rose. Some whispered prayers, others expressed disbelief, some simply stared in silent awe. They had lived through what no one expected. They had been given a second chance. She took a deep breath, muscles finally relaxing slightly, eyes sweeping over the group of survivors. Their faces, etched with fear, gratitude, and disbelief, reflected the raw intensity of the night. The captain approached once more. "You've done more than anyone could have expected," he said quietly. "Not just in the air, but here with everyone on the ground. You saved them all." Her knees threatened to buckle, fatigue overwhelming her. Yet in the midst of exhaustion, a small flicker of pride ignited. She had faced terror, chaos, and near-certain disaster, and had survived. The passengers were safe. The plane, for now, was contained. But deep in her chest, a lingering echo of tension remained. A reminder that survival was never guaranteed, that courage was demanded when least expected, and that one person's resolve could make the difference between life and death. And as she stood there, looking at the damaged plane and the people she had guided through terror, she realized that the night would forever mark them all, a testament to courage, resilience, and the fragile, extraordinary miracle of survival. The first faint glow of dawn stretched across the horizon, brushing the rain-slicked tarmac with pale gold. The storm had passed entirely, leaving behind a world washed clean, silent except for the hum of emergency vehicles and the soft whispers of exhausted survivors. The damaged plane sat like a silent sentinel, smoke reduced to wisps, its twisted metal still scarred from the night's violence. It had survived, barely, and so had they. She stepped back, muscles trembling from fatigue, sweat still dripping from her brow. Her hands were raw from gripping controls, levers, and flashlight handles, but her mind refused to rest. Every second of the night had been a battle, every heartbeat a reminder of how fragile survival was. Around her, passengers began to stir, some embracing loved ones, some still sitting in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the reality that they were alive. Children clutched parents, eyes wide, some sobbing quietly, still processing what had happened. Elderly passengers held hands, offering silent nods of gratitude to each other, their relief mingled with disbelief. The captain approached, drenched in rain and sweat, his uniform wrinkled and soaked. "We need to debrief, ensure everyone is safe," he said, voice calm but carrying a note of awe. "And you," he paused, letting the words linger. "You saved them all. Tonight you were extraordinary." She shook her head, swallowing hard. "We all did it. Passengers, crew, emergency personnel, everyone contributed, but it's over. We survived." Yet as she looked at the plane, even now silent and stabilized, a shiver ran through her. The aircraft bore the scars of the storm, the emergency landing, and the critical engine failure. It had been alive, almost malevolent in its power to destroy, and she had faced it head-on. Ground crews moved carefully around the plane, inspecting, securing, and documenting damage. Engineers murmured among themselves, evaluating structural integrity and making plans for towing and repairs. Sparks were gone, smoke minimal, but every movement around the plane was cautious, a reminder of how close they had come to catastrophe. Passengers were guided to a nearby shelter, blankets draped over shoulders, faces pale but slowly relaxing into the rhythm of survival. Mothers comforted children, some murmuring prayers, others simply holding them tight, letting the sheer act of human touch provide solace. Strangers embraced, offering silent gestures of gratitude and solidarity. They had lived through the impossible together, bound by fear, courage, and the raw intensity of survival. She walked among them, offering quiet reassurance, kneeling to calm children, patting shoulders, nodding to those whose eyes were wide with disbelief. Each face reflected the tension, terror, and miraculous relief of the night. She allowed herself a small smile, fragile but genuine, as gratitude met her gaze repeatedly. One man approached, voice trembling. I don't even know how to thank you. I thought we were done for. You saved us." She shook her head, voice soft but steady. "You survived because you trusted the crew, trusted yourself, and stayed calm. That courage kept everyone alive. I only guided you through it." The man nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "Guided us through. You carried us through death and fear." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't speak immediately. The weight of the night still pressed upon her chest, muscles still trembling from adrenaline, fear, and exhaustion. But she allowed herself a single moment to feel the enormity of what they had survived. Children laughed softly now, relief replacing fear, the tension slowly dissolving as the sunrise grew brighter. Mothers held infants, some whispering prayers of thanks, others crying quietly, letting emotion flow after the terror. Elderly passengers exchanged nods, hands clasped, relief tangible in every motion. She looked back at the plane one last time. Twisted metal, scorched surfaces, and a damaged engine told the story of the night's chaos. It had tested everyone's limits, passengers, crew, and herself. But it had also revealed something extraordinary: courage, composure, and the raw human instinct to survive under impossible circumstances. The captain returned, approaching her quietly. "The engineers will take over from here," he said. "You can rest. The passengers are safe and the plane is secured. You've done more than anyone could have imagined." She nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over her, but relief mingled with a sense of profound accomplishment. She had faced death at 30,000 feet, storm-lashed skis, a critical engine failure, and a near-disastrous evacuation, and survived. But more than that, she had guided over 100 lives through the storm with courage and focus. Emergency crews began clearing equipment, making the scene safe. The remaining smoke hissed softly, the last traces of danger fading under careful human control. The tarmac reflected the rising sun, turning the rain-slick surface into a mirror of light and shadow. Survival, fragile and extraordinary, shimmered across the landscape. She moved toward the passengers, now regrouped, sitting quietly on blankets, some still holding onto children, some wiping tears from cheeks streaked with rain. Their expressions told the story of the night: terror, hope, gratitude, disbelief, and relief. They had been through something no one could ever forget. A little boy approached, clutching a small stuffed bear, eyes wide. Did we really survive?" he asked, voice trembling. She knelt to his level, smiling gently. "Yes," she said softly. "You survived, everyone survived, you're safe now." He nodded, wrapping the bear tightly in both arms, and ran back to his mother. She watched him go, letting herself feel a small surge of relief and pride. The night's chaos was behind them, and dawn had arrived, bright, fragile, and beautiful. The captain approached once more. "We should get you checked by medical personnel. You've been through a lot." She shook her head, voice quiet. "No, I need to make sure the passengers are okay first." He nodded, respect and admiration in his eyes. Always the one who takes care of others first. That's remarkable. She smiled faintly, exhaustion making the movement fragile. Around her, passengers began to share stories in quiet voices, recounting moments of fear, bravery, and survival. Families embraced, and strangers exchanged nods of shared experience. In the aftermath of chaos, human resilience shone. She finally allowed herself to step back, surveying the scene. The plane, though scarred and damaged, was contained. The passengers, though shaken, were alive. The storm was gone, and for the first time in hours she felt something she hadn't dared to feel all night: relief. Yet beneath the relief, a quiet awareness lingered. The night had tested every nerve, every skill, and every ounce of courage. It had reminded her how fragile life was, how quickly circumstances could shift from ordinary to deadly, and how vital calm leadership and human resilience were in the face of the unimaginable. Emergency personnel now guided passengers to waiting buses, ready to transport them to safety. Families clung together, children held tight, and the passengers began to move. She walked alongside them, ensuring everyone was accounted for, the tension slowly giving way to quiet recovery. The first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, illuminating the soaked tarmac, the still smoking plane, and the huddled figures of the survivors. It was a new day, one born from courage, resilience, and the extraordinary human instinct to survive against impossible odds. She finally allowed herself to breathe fully, knees weak, heart still racing but steadily slowing. The night's terror had ended. They had survived, all of them, and the realization settled over her like a warm embrace. They had faced death, chaos, and despair, and emerged alive together. For the passengers, it would be a story told for a lifetime. For her, it was a test of courage, skill, and the quiet, unyielding strength that could guide over 100 souls through the impossible. As the buses departed, carrying passengers to safety, she took one last look at the damaged aircraft, standing silent on the tarmac, scars gleaming in the sunrise. The storm was gone. The danger for now had passed, and for the first time she allowed herself a faint smile of satisfaction, exhaustion mingling with triumph. They had survived, against the storm, against the plane, against every impossible odds. And as dawn fully broke, painting the sky with pale gold and pink, the survivors, passengers, crew, and the quiet hero who had guided them through it all, stepped into the new day, forever marked by the night that tested the limits of human courage and resilience. The storm was over, but the story of fear, courage, and miraculous survival, would live on forever.